My name is Caroline Mitchell. I'm 36 years old, and I work as a physical therapist here in Portland, Oregon. For 8 months straight, 240 nights in a row, I watched the man I married fall apart, piece by piece. Every evening at 8 o'clock sharp, Marcus would grab his worn leather jacket from the hook by our front door, kiss my cheek with lips that trembled slightly, and whisper that he needed to be with his mother, that she was slipping away, that the oncologists at Mercy General Hospital had given her weeks, maybe just days, left to live, that he couldn't bear the thought of her dying alone in that sterile room, surrounded by beeping machines instead of family. He'd come home exhausted every night, sometimes at midnight, sometimes at 2 in the morning, occasionally not until 3 or 4 a.m. His eyes would be bloodshot and swollen. His clothes would smell like hospital antiseptic, mixed with something heavier, grief maybe, or despair. And he'd tell me stories about her deterioration, about how the cancer was eating her alive from the inside, about how she'd had another seizure, about how the morphine wasn't touching her pain anymore, about how she'd gripped his hand with surprising strength and begged him, pleaded with him, not to leave her alone in the darkness. I believed every single word that came out of his mouth. I trusted him completely, without question, without hesitation. I held him when he cried. I made him chamomile tea at 2 in the morning. I rubbed his shoulders while he sat on our couch, staring at nothing, processing horrors I couldn't imagine. I told him he was the best son any mother could ask for. I told him his devotion was beautiful. I told him I was proud of him for showing up night after night, even when it was destroying him. Until the night I followed him to Mercy General Hospital and discovered that the woman in room 418 wasn't his dying mother at all. She was his wife. His actual, legal, real wife. The woman he'd married 15 years ago and had never divorced. The woman whose existence meant that everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my home, my identity, my past 13 years, was a complete and total lie. But before I tell you exactly what happened when I pushed open that hospital room door, before I explain how I watched my entire world collapse in the space of a single heartbeat, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, drop a comment below telling me your name and where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. This could be your story. This could be your sister's story, your best friend's story, your coworker's story. This happens to real people every single day. People who trust, people who love, people who never see it coming, people exactly like me. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to January 14th, when winter rain hammered Portland, and I still believed I was living a real life. Marcus and I met 13 years ago at our mutual friend Sarah's wedding reception. I was 23 years old, fresh out of graduate school with my doctorate in physical therapy, just starting my career at Oregon Health and Science University. I was nervous, socially awkward, wearing a dress I'd borrowed from my roommate because I couldn't afford anything nice on my student loans. Marcus was 25, working in pharmaceutical sales, tall and confident in a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly. He had this way of looking at you when you talked, really looking, really listening, that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked for hours at that wedding, about everything and nothing, about our families, our careers, our favorite books, our shared love of hiking in the Pacific Northwest. When the reception ended, he asked for my number. I gave it to him, expecting never to hear from him again, because men like Marcus didn't call women like me. But he did call, the next day, and we went to dinner at this little Italian place in the Pearl District, and then we went to breakfast the next morning, and then we couldn't stop seeing each other. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6 months, he proposed on a rainy Saturday afternoon at Powell's Books, my favorite place in the entire world. He got down on one knee right there in the Blue Room, in front of hundreds of strangers and thousands of books, and asked me to marry him. I said yes immediately. Obviously, I said yes. Marcus was everything I'd ever wanted: kind, attentive, supportive, funny. He encouraged my career. He listened when I talked about my patients. He remembered little things, like how I took my coffee or what podcasts I loved, or which Thai restaurant made the best pad see ew. He was thoughtful in ways I'd never experienced before. He left little notes in my lunch bag. He bought me flowers for no reason. He held my hand when we walked down the street. We got married 3 months later at the Multnomah County Courthouse. It was a small ceremony, just our closest friends and my sister Emma. We couldn't afford anything big. I was still paying off student loans, and Marcus was still building his career. But it felt perfect to me, intimate and real, and ours. Marcus handled all the paperwork, the marriage license application, the filing, all of it. I was busy with work and wedding planning, so I was grateful he took care of the administrative details. After the ceremony, we had dinner at Ava Jean's, this beautiful Italian restaurant we'd been saving up for. Then we spent a long weekend in Vancouver, British Columbia. It felt like the beginning of everything. We built what I thought was a good life together, a real life. We rented for a few years, saved aggressively, and eventually bought a small craftsman house in the Selwood neighborhood. It needed work. The hardwood floors were scratched, the kitchen was outdated, the bathroom tile was from the 1970s, but it was ours. We spent weekends at estate sales and Habitat for Humanity Restore, finding vintage fixtures and secondhand furniture. We painted every room ourselves. We planted a garden in the backyard, tomatoes and herbs and sunflowers. We adopted a cat from the Oregon Humane Society, a gray tabby we named Fitzgerald. Our routines felt safe and comfortable. Saturday mornings at the Portland Farmers Market, buying fresh vegetables and artisan bread. Sunday hikes in Forest Park or along the Columbia River Gorge. Wednesday night dinners at our favorite Thai place on Hawthorne, always ordering the same things. Pad Thai for me, drunken noodles for him. Friday date nights, rotating between our favorite spots in the city. Movie theaters, art galleries, live music venues, cozy wine bars. We talked about starting a family once we saved enough money to add a second bathroom and convert the spare bedroom into a nursery. We talked about taking a big trip to Europe when we turned 40. We talked about growing old together, about retiring somewhere near the coast, about spending our golden years walking on beaches and reading books and being content. It felt normal. It felt real. It felt like everything a marriage should be. Marcus's family history seemed simple enough. He'd grown up in Sacramento with his parents and an older brother named Tyler. His father, Richard, had died suddenly when Marcus was 17, a brain aneurysm that killed him before the ambulance even arrived. Marcus said it had devastated the family, that his mother, Helen, had never really recovered from the loss, that she'd become withdrawn and distant after Richard's death, pulling away from extended family and friends. Helen still lived in Sacramento, in the same small house where Marcus had grown up. She lived alone, worked part-time at a library, kept to herself. Marcus called her every other Sunday evening. They'd talk for 20 or 30 minutes. Surface-level conversations about weather and work and not much else. She visited Portland maybe 4 times in all our years together, brief, uncomfortable visits where she'd stay at a hotel downtown rather than with us. She'd meet us for dinner, make stiff small talk, comment on the weather, and then leave after an hour or 2. I always thought it was strange, the distance between them, the awkwardness. But Marcus explained it as grief. He said losing his father had fundamentally changed his mother, that she'd never learned how to connect after that kind of trauma, that some people process loss by shutting down. I accepted that explanation because I had no reason not to. Some families are close, some aren't. That's just how life works. Everything changed on January 14th of this year. I remember that date specifically because it was the 12-year anniversary of my father's death, and I'd taken the day off work to visit his grave at Riverview Cemetery. It's something I do every year: bring fresh flowers, clean the headstone, sit there for an hour, and tell him about my life. I'd been there most of the morning, sitting on the wet grass in the drizzling rain, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Call came from Sacramento. Mom collapsed. They found a tumor. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They're transferring her to Portland tonight. My hands shook as I read it. I called Marcus immediately, but he didn't answer. I tried 3 more times. Nothing. I drove home in a panic, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When Marcus finally called back 2 hours later, his voice sounded destroyed, rough and raw, like he'd been screaming or crying or both. They found her this morning, he said, barely able to get the words out. Her neighbor noticed her newspapers piling up on the porch for 3 days. When Helen didn't answer the door, the neighbor called the police. They found her unconscious on her kitchen floor. She'd been there for at least 12 hours, maybe longer. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Is she okay? What happened?" "Massive stroke," Marcus choked out. But when they did the brain scans at the hospital in Sacramento, they found something else, a tumor. Pancreatic cancer that's metastasized to her brain. Stage 4, Caroline. The doctors said she has maybe 6 months, maybe less. I felt tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry. Marcus, I'm so sorry. What do you need? What can I do?" "She's being transferred here tonight," he said. "She asked for Portland. There's a specialist at Mercy General, Dr. Kenji Yamamoto. He's supposedly one of the best neuro-oncologists in the Pacific Northwest. He's done some experimental work with brain metastases. She wants to try. She wants to fight." "Of course she does," I said. "When will she get here? Do you want me to come to the hospital with you?" There was a long pause. Then Marcus said quietly, "She doesn't want anyone to see her. Caroline, you know how private she is, how proud. She said she doesn't want anyone except me visiting. She doesn't want people to see her weak, dying, hooked up to machines. She specifically said she doesn't want you there yet." That stung a little, I won't lie. But I also understood. I'd been a healthcare professional for over a decade. I'd seen how vulnerable patients feel in hospitals, how exposed and frightened and stripped of dignity. If Helen needed time before she was ready for visitors, I could respect that. "Okay," I said softly. "I understand, but tell her I'm thinking about her. Tell her I'm praying for her. And Marcus, tell her I love her." "I will," Marcus promised. "Thank you for understanding. I love you. I love you too." 2 days later, Marcus came home from work and told me Helen had arrived at Mercy General. She was in the ICU, room 418. The transfer had been rough. She'd seized twice during transport, but she was stable now, conscious, but heavily medicated. The doctors were still running tests, still trying to determine the best treatment protocol. "Can I go with you tonight?" I asked. "Even if I can't go in the room, I could wait in the hallway, just to be there for you." Marcus shook his head, his expression pained. "She made me promise, Caroline, absolutely no visitors except me. She's embarrassed. She said she looks like a corpse. She can barely speak because of the stroke damage. She doesn't want anyone to see her like this. Not until she's improved enough to look more like herself." "When will that be?" I asked gently. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "The doctors aren't optimistic. They said the brain damage from the stroke is permanent. Even if the cancer treatment works, which is unlikely, she'll never fully recover." My heart broke for him, for both of them. "I'm so sorry. This is so unfair." "It is," Marcus agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm going to be there for her, every single night. I'm going to sit with her and hold her hand and make sure she doesn't die alone." And that's exactly what he did. Every single evening at 8 o'clock, Marcus would come home from work, shower quickly, change into comfortable clothes, and head out to Mercy General. He'd come home between midnight and 2 a.m., sometimes even later. And every single night when he walked through our front door, he looked more exhausted than the night before. His eyes would be red-rimmed and puffy. His shoulders would slump with the weight of what he was witnessing. And he'd tell me about Helen's condition. The updates were always devastating. "She had 3 seizures today," he'd say, collapsing onto our couch. "They had to increase her anti-seizure medication, but it's making her even more out of it. She barely recognizes me anymore. Or, the cancer's spreading faster than they thought. Dr. Yamamoto said the experimental treatment isn't working. They're switching to palliative care, just trying to keep her comfortable at this point. Or, she tried to talk to me tonight. She kept trying to say something, but the stroke damage, she can't form words anymore. She just cried, and I sat there holding her hand, knowing I couldn't help her, couldn't take away her pain. Some nights Marcus would cry, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. I'd hold him on our couch, stroking his hair, whispering that it was okay to grieve, that this was one of the hardest things anyone could go through. Other nights he'd just sit in silence, staring at the wall, processing things too dark and terrible to put into words. I felt so much compassion for him during this time. Watching a parent die is a unique kind of torture, especially when it's slow and painful and inevitable. I wanted to support Marcus in every way I possibly could. I made sure dinner was ready when he got home from the hospital. Easy comfort foods like soup or pasta or mac and cheese. I stocked the fridge with his favorite drinks. I kept the house clean so he wouldn't have to worry about chores. I sent him little texts throughout the day telling him I loved him, that I was proud of him, that he was doing the right thing by being there for his mother. This routine went on for weeks, then months. January turned into February. February turned into March. March turned into April. By May, Marcus had been making nightly hospital visits for 4 full months, and Helen was still hanging on, barely alive, but not quite dead, trapped in some horrifying liminal space between life and death. And during all of that time, I never once questioned Marcus's story. I never once doubted him. Because why would I? This was my husband, the man I'd been with for 13 years, the man who'd proposed to me in a bookstore, the man who left me love notes in my lunch bag, the man who'd stood in front of our friends and promised to love me, honor me, and cherish me for the rest of our lives. You don't suspect someone like that of lying. You don't imagine they're capable of that level of deception. You trust them. You believe them. You support them through their grief, until you can't ignore the red flags anymore. The first crack in the facade appeared in early March. I was at work at OHSU, taking my lunch break in the hospital cafeteria, when my coworker and friend Tessa joined me at my table. Tessa was a nurse in the oncology department, sharp and experienced, someone who'd been working at OHSU for over 20 years. We were talking about our weekends, our lives, the usual small talk, when I mentioned in passing that my mother-in-law was in critical condition at Mercy General and that my husband had been visiting her every single night for the past 2 months. Tessa's eyebrows shot up. Every night? Wow, that's incredibly dedicated. He's a good son, I said, picking at my salad. She's dying and he doesn't want her to be alone. That's beautiful, Tessa said slowly, but I thought Mercy's ICU visiting hours ended at 9 p.m. They're pretty strict about it, something about patient rest protocols and infection control. I felt this weird flutter in my chest, not quite panic, but something close to it. Maybe they make exceptions for terminal patients. Maybe, Tessa said, but her tone was doubtful. She frowned, stirring her coffee. Usually they're even more strict with ICU patients, not less. The equipment, the monitors, the overnight assessments. Family members just get in the way. I mean, every hospital's different, but I'd be surprised if Mercy was letting someone stay until midnight or later every single night. That's really unusual. Huh, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I'll have to ask Marcus about it. But I didn't ask Marcus, because asking felt like accusing, felt like doubting, felt like I was being a bad wife during the worst time in his life. So I pushed Tessa's comment to the back of my mind and tried to forget about it. Except I couldn't forget about it. It sat there like a tiny splinter under my skin, small enough to ignore, but always present, always uncomfortable. Then, in mid-April, something stranger happened. I was home on a Saturday afternoon, working in the garden, pulling weeds and pruning our rose bushes, when our landline rang. We rarely used our landline anymore. Most people called our cell phones, but we kept it because Marcus's mother occasionally called it. I went inside, pulled off my gardening gloves, and answered. Hello? Hey, Caroline. The voice on the other end was cheerful and familiar. "It's Lisa. Is Marcus around?" Lisa was Marcus's cousin on his father's side, a sweet woman in her 40s who lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 teenage daughters. I'd met her maybe 6 or 7 times at family gatherings over the years. We'd always gotten along well. "Oh, hi, Lisa. No, Marcus is out running errands. He should be back in an hour or so. Do you want me to have him call you?" "That'd be great, thanks. I just wanted to check in about Aunt Helen's hip surgery recovery. Marcus mentioned she had a pretty bad fall last month, and I've been meaning to send a care package or flowers or something. How's she doing?" The world tilted slightly. I gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself. "I'm sorry, what?" "Aunt Helen's hip surgery? Marcus told me she fell in her apartment in Sacramento and fractured her hip. I think he said the surgery was about 3 weeks ago. I've just been so busy with work and the girls' soccer schedules, but I felt terrible that I hadn't reached out sooner." My mouth went dry. "Lisa, when exactly did Marcus tell you this?" "Maybe 3 weeks ago?" I called him at work because I'd heard through the family grapevine that something happened to Aunt Helen. "Why, is everything okay? Did I get the details wrong?" My mind was spinning. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had told me that Helen was in the ICU at Mercy General in Portland, dying of stage 4 cancer that had metastasized to her brain. But he'd told Lisa that Helen was in Sacramento recovering from hip surgery? "Caroline?" Lisa's voice turned concerned. "Are you there? Did I say something wrong?" I forced myself to sound calm, even though my heart was hammering. No, everything's fine. I think there's just been some miscommunication. Maybe Marcus was talking about a different family member or something. I'll have him give you a call to clear it up, okay?" "Okay," Lisa said slowly, clearly confused. "Please do. I'm worried now." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, just staring at nothing. My hands were shaking. Because there was no way to reconcile these two stories. Either Helen was in Portland dying of cancer, or she was in Sacramento recovering from hip surgery. She couldn't be both. Which meant Marcus was lying to someone, either to me or to Lisa, or to both of us. When Marcus came home 2 hours later, carrying bags from Home Depot, I confronted him immediately. Though confront is too strong a word, I was still gentle, still giving him every benefit of every doubt, still approaching this as a misunderstanding rather than a lie. "Hey, Lisa called earlier. She wanted to check on your mom's hip surgery recovery." I kept my tone light, curious rather than accusatory. Marcus's face went through this rapid series of micro-expressions: surprise, then panic, then something that looked like mental calculation. But it happened so fast, I almost missed it. Within a second, his features had smoothed into an expression of tired sadness. "Oh, God," he sighed, setting down the Home Depot bags and rubbing his face with both hands. "I completely forgot I told her that." "Told her what?" I pressed gently. "The hip surgery story. It's not true, Caroline. My mom's here. She's at Mercy General, dying of cancer, just like I told you. But He sat down heavily on our couch, looking miserable. "Mom made me promise not to tell the extended family about the cancer. She didn't want everyone calling, visiting, hovering, pitying her. She wanted privacy, dignity. So when Lisa called a few weeks ago asking why I'd been distant, why I'd missed some family texts and calls, I panicked. I made up this story about Mom having hip surgery in Sacramento. I thought it would buy me some time, explain my distraction, without having to reveal the truth." He looked up at me with exhausted, red-rimmed eyes. "I should have told you I was covering with the extended family. I'm sorry. There's just been so much happening, so much to manage, and I didn't think anyone would compare notes." It sounded plausible. Helen was intensely private. The idea that she'd want to keep her illness quiet from distant relatives made sense. And Marcus had been dealing with so much. It was believable that he'd get his stories confused, that he'd create a cover story for the extended family without thinking to tell me. But something in my gut twisted uncomfortably. "So your mom really is at Mercy General, in room 418? "Yes," Marcus said firmly, holding my gaze. I swear to you, Caroline, she's in room 418 in the ICU. I've been visiting her every single night for 4 months. This thing with Lisa, it was just me trying to protect my mom's privacy. I shouldn't have lied to family, and I definitely should have told you I was doing it. I'm sorry. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so desperately. So I nodded and told him I understood. I hugged him and told him it was okay, that these were impossible circumstances, that I didn't blame him for being overwhelmed. But the doubt didn't go away. It just burrowed deeper, growing roots. Over the next few weeks, more inconsistencies piled up. Small things that individually seemed meaningless, but together formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. In early May, I noticed Marcus had changed his phone passcode. We'd always had an open phone policy in our marriage, not because we were checking up on each other or because we didn't trust each other, but simply out of convenience. Sometimes my phone would die and I'd need to use his to call my sister. Sometimes he'd be driving and ask me to respond to a text for him. We knew each other's passcodes the same way we knew each other's coffee orders or favorite songs. It was just information that married people shared. But one evening in May, my phone was charging in the bedroom, and I needed to quickly look up the address of a restaurant where we had dinner reservations. Marcus's phone was sitting on the coffee table, so I picked it up and entered his passcode. Incorrect passcode. Try again. I frowned and tried again, more carefully this time, making sure I hit each number precisely. Incorrect passcode. Try again. That weird flutter in my chest returned. Marcus had changed his passcode, and he hadn't told me. Need something? Marcus's voice came from behind me. I turned to see him standing in the kitchen doorway, and for just a flash, barely a fraction of a second, I saw something like fear cross his face. Then it was gone, replaced by a casual smile. My phone's dead, and I was trying to look up the restaurant address, I said, trying to keep my voice light. But your passcode isn't working. Did you change it? Oh yeah, I had to, Marcus said, walking over and taking the phone from my hands. He unlocked it with his thumbprint and handed it back to me. Work mandated new security protocols last week. Since I access patient data and hospital systems for medical equipment sales, they required all of us to update to biometric authentication with randomized backup passcodes. It's part of some new HIPAA compliance thing. The system auto-generated a new code, and I honestly don't even know what it is. I just use my fingerprint now. He said it so smoothly, so casually, and the explanation sounded technical enough to be plausible. Except I knew how phone security worked. Biometric authentication didn't force random passcode changes. That wasn't how any of this worked. You could add fingerprint or face recognition, but your passcode remained whatever you'd set it as. Companies couldn't remotely change your personal phone passcode, but I didn't call him out on it. Instead, I just nodded and used his unlocked phone to find the restaurant address. I handed it back to him with a thank you and tried to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach. The list of things that didn't make sense kept growing. Then there were the nights Marcus came home smelling different. Most nights, he'd return from the hospital smelling exactly like you'd expect. Sharp antiseptic, hand sanitizer, that distinctive hospital smell that clings to your clothes and hair. As a healthcare worker myself, I knew that smell intimately. It was the smell of fluorescent lights and linoleum floors and industrial cleaning products, the smell of sickness and sterility and suffering. But maybe once or twice a week, randomly, with no pattern I could discern, Marcus would come home smelling different. Not bad different, just different. There'd be an underlying floral scent mixed in with the hospital smell, sweet and light, like gardenias or jasmine. Perfume. The first time I noticed it was in mid-May. Marcus came home just after midnight, looking exhausted as usual, and when I hugged him, I caught this whiff of something flowery. "You smell nice," I said, pulling back to look at him. "Different, I mean. Did you get new soap at the hospital or something?" Marcus laughed tiredly. "No, it's not me. It's Sandra, one of the night shift nurses who's been taking care of Mom. She wears this incredibly strong perfume, like overwhelmingly strong. Tonight, Mom had a really scary episode. Her blood pressure dropped and she stopped breathing for almost 30 seconds. The whole team rushed in, got her stabilized, but it was terrifying. Afterward, Sandra gave me this big hug because she could see how shaken up I was. The perfume must have transferred. "That's sweet of her," I said. "I'm so sorry that happened. Is your mom okay now?" "For now," Marcus said quietly. "But the doctor said these episodes are going to get more frequent. Her body's shutting down. It's just a matter of time." I held him while he cried, breathing in that strange mix of hospital antiseptic and floral perfume, trying to comfort him through what seemed like an unbearable ordeal. But then, 2 weeks later, he came home smelling like perfume again, and then again the following week. And each time, he had a variation on the same explanation. Sandra had hugged him, or Sandra had been standing close while discussing his mother's care plan, or Sandra had accidentally brushed against him in the narrow ICU room. It was always Sandra, always the same nurse, always the same perfume, always a plausible, innocent explanation. But why would a nurse wear strong perfume in a hospital? Most hospitals had scent-free policies, especially in ICU and oncology units, where patients were often sensitive to smells. I'd never met an ICU nurse who wore perfume to work. It seemed unlikely, unprofessional even. I added it to my list. By late May, another detail had started bothering me. We hadn't received a single piece of mail from Mercy General Hospital. I worked in healthcare. I understood how hospital billing worked. Even with excellent insurance, even with Medicare or Medicaid, patients and their families received constant correspondence. Explanation of benefits forms, itemized billing statements, notices about copays or deductibles, insurance claims, payment reminders. Hospital billing departments were notoriously aggressive and persistent. They sent letters weekly, sometimes daily. But in the 4 months since Marcus's mother had supposedly been at Mercy General, 4 months of ICU care, experimental treatments, round-the-clock monitoring, medications, scans, procedures, we hadn't received a single piece of mail. Not one envelope with the Mercy General logo. Not one insurance statement. Nothing. One evening in late May, just before Marcus left for his nightly visit, I brought it up as casually as I could manage. "Hey, have you gotten any hospital bills for your mom? Or any insurance statements?" Marcus was pulling on his jacket, keys already in his hand. He barely glanced at me. "No, everything's billed directly to her Medicare. She's fully covered." "Even the experimental treatments?" I pressed gently. "I thought Medicare doesn't usually cover experimental or investigational treatments. There's normally pre-authorization requirements and—" "She got into a clinical trial," Marcus interrupted, cutting me off. He sounded slightly irritated, like I was making him late. "Dr. Yamamoto's clinical trial for brain metastases. It covers everything. The treatment, the hospital stay, medications, all of it. We won't see any bills. There's no cost to the family." "Oh," I said. "That's good." "Yeah," Marcus said, already halfway to the door. "I really have to go, babe. I'm already 20 minutes late." And he was gone. I stood in our hallway, listening to his car start in the driveway, listening to the sound of the engine fade as he drove away. And I tried to convince myself that his explanation made sense. Except clinical trials didn't work that way. I knew that because I'd worked with clinical trial patients before, back when I'd done a rotation through the Cancer Rehabilitation Unit at OHSU. Clinical trials covered the cost of the experimental treatment itself, but patients were still responsible for standard care costs, hospital room fees, nursing care, supportive medications, scans, and blood work. Insurance still processed claims. Families still received billing statements. There should have been something in our mailbox, some kind of paperwork, some kind of documentation. The absence of it felt wrong. By early June, 5 full months into this nightmare, the voice in my head telling me something was wrong had become impossible to ignore. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a scream, a constant, deafening alarm bell ringing in my mind every time Marcus kissed me goodbye, every time he came home with red eyes and hospital smell clothes, every time he told me another heartbreaking story about his dying mother. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night next to Marcus, listening to him breathe, staring at the ceiling, running through every inconsistency in my mind. The ICU visiting hours, the cousin's phone call, the changed passcode, the perfume smell, the missing bills. The fact that in 5 months, Marcus had never once suggested I send flowers or a card. The fact that I'd never spoken to a single doctor or nurse. The fact that Helen's condition seemed to stay exactly the same, critical but stable, dying but not yet dead, for month after month after month. Individually, each thing had a reasonable explanation, but together they formed a pattern that suggested something was very, very wrong. I thought about confronting Marcus directly, sitting him down, listing all my concerns, demanding complete honesty and transparency. But what would I say? Your explanations are too convenient? My gut feeling says you're lying? I don't trust you even though you've given me no concrete reason not to. I'd sound paranoid, unstable, like a jealous, suspicious wife inventing problems where none existed. Like I was attacking him during the worst crisis of his life, when he was already drowning in grief and exhaustion. I thought about confiding in my sister Emma, but Emma had never particularly liked Marcus. She'd always thought he was too smooth, too perfect, too good to be true. If I told her my suspicions, she'd immediately jump to, "He's having an affair," and push me to leave him. And I wasn't ready for that, not without proof. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but that felt insane. That felt like something people did in movies, not in real life. And it would cost money we didn't really have. And if I was wrong, if Marcus really was visiting his dying mother every night, and I'd hired someone to follow him, I'd be the villain. I'd be the terrible wife who didn't trust her devoted husband. So instead, I made a different decision, a simpler decision. I decided to verify the one thing I could actually check, whether or not there was a patient named Helen Mitchell at Mercy General Hospital. On June 15th, a Saturday afternoon, Marcus left the house to meet some work colleagues for drinks in the Pearl District. He said he'd be gone for a few hours, that he needed a break from the hospital, needed some normalcy, needed to decompress with friends who could distract him for a little while. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and dialed Mercy General Hospital. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. My heart hammered in my chest. Part of me was praying I'd find out I was wrong, that I'd been paranoid and suspicious for no reason, that there'd been some clerical confusion and everything Marcus had told me was true. But a larger part of me, the part that had been screaming at me for months, knew I was about to confirm my worst fears. The phone rang twice before a pleasant-sounding older woman answered. "Mercy General Hospital, how may I direct your call?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Hi. Yes, I'm hoping you can help me. I'd like to send flowers to a patient who's currently in your ICU. Her name is Helen Mitchell, Mitchell. Could you transfer me to the ICU nurses station so I can confirm her room number?" There was a pause. I heard the soft clicking of computer keys. Then, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm not showing any patient by that name in our ICU. Could you verify the spelling for me?" My stomach dropped. Yes, it's Helen, Helen, Mitchell, Mitchell. She's been there since January. She has stage 4 cancer, room 418. More keyboard clicking, a longer pause. "I'm sorry, but I'm not showing a Helen Mitchell in room 418 or anywhere else in our ICU. Let me check our general patient registry just to be thorough." I waited, barely breathing while she searched. Each second felt like an hour. "No, ma'am. I'm showing no patient by that name anywhere in our facility. Not in the ICU, not in oncology, not in any department. Are you certain about the hospital? Could she perhaps be at OHSU or Providence or Legacy Emmanuel? Could you check under Helen Crawford?" I blurted out, using what I thought might be Marcus's mother's maiden name. "Or maybe just any Helen currently in the ICU?" Of course. More typing. "We currently have one Helen admitted, Helen Pack, age 81, in our cardiac care unit, But that's our only Helen. The room was spinning. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. And room 418? Who's in room 418? Room 418 is in our long-term care wing, not the ICU, the operator said. I can't give you specific patient information, but I can tell you that room is currently occupied. Would you like me to transfer you to that unit's nurses' station? No, I whispered. No, that's okay. Thank you for your help. I hung up before she could respond. Then I sank down onto my kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, and I felt my entire reality fracture apart. There was no Helen Mitchell at Mercy General Hospital. There was no dying mother in the ICU. There was no stage 4 cancer patient fighting for her life in room 418. Marcus had been lying to me for 5 months. Every single night. Every kiss goodbye, every tearful return, every story about seizures and pain and morphine and failed treatments, all of it had been lies. So where had he been going? Who was in room 418? And why would Marcus construct such an elaborate, cruel deception? I sat on that kitchen floor for over an hour, my mind cycling through possibilities. Each one seemed more terrible than the last. The obvious answer was an affair. Marcus was seeing someone else. But that didn't fully make sense. If he was having an affair, why not just say he was working late, or going to the gym, or meeting friends? Why create this entire fictional scenario about a dying mother that could be so easily disproven? Why take the risk of such a complicated lie when a simpler one would work just as well? Unless the woman he was seeing was at the hospital. A patient maybe, or a hospital employee, someone he couldn't meet anywhere else. But even that didn't fully track. Why would an affair require nightly visits at the exact same time for months on end? Affairs were usually more sporadic, more spontaneous. This felt like something else, something I couldn't quite wrap my mind around. I thought about confronting Marcus the second he walked through the door. I imagined screaming at him, demanding the truth, refusing to accept any more lies or excuses. I imagined packing my bags and leaving before he got home, staying with Emma, filing for divorce immediately. But then I realized I didn't know what I was confronting him about. I didn't have the full picture. All I knew was that he'd lied. I didn't know why, or what the truth was, or how deep the deception went. I needed to see for myself. I needed to know the complete truth, not the version Marcus would give me when caught, carefully edited and crafted to minimize the damage, but the actual, real, unfiltered truth. I needed to follow him to Mercy General Hospital. I needed to see what was really happening in room 418. That evening, Marcus came home from drinks with his coworkers around 7:30. He seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. The first time I'd seen him look anything close to happy in months. He told me about the restaurant they'd gone to, about the appetizers they'd shared, about some funny story one of his colleagues had told about a disastrous client meeting. For those few minutes, he seemed like the Marcus I'd fallen in love with 13 years ago, before the lies, before the secrets, before everything. At 8 o'clock, like clockwork, his expression shifted. The lightness drained from his face, replaced by that familiar heavy sadness. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and moved toward the door. "Heading to see your mom?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Yeah," Marcus said softly. "The nurse called earlier and said she's been asking for me. Well, not asking exactly. She can't really communicate anymore. But she gets agitated when I'm not there. They can tell she's looking for me." He kissed my cheek. His lips felt like ice against my skin. "I love you. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." "I love you too," I said automatically. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I watched him walk to his car through our front window, watched him pull out of the driveway, watched his taillights disappear down our tree-lined street. Then I waited exactly 3 minutes, long enough for him to get a few blocks away, short enough that I could still catch up to him on the road. I grabbed my rain jacket, my car keys, and my phone. I pulled my hair back into a ponytail and put on a dark baseball cap. I felt ridiculous, like I was playing amateur detective in some bad TV drama. But I also felt grimly determined. I was going to find out the truth. Tonight, whatever it was. Following Marcus through Portland traffic while staying undetected was simultaneously the easiest and most terrifying thing I'd ever done. Easy because it was early evening on a Saturday, and the roads were busy enough that I could keep several cars between us without losing him. Easy because Marcus had no reason to suspect I was following him, so he wasn't checking his mirrors or taking evasive routes. But terrifying because with every mile we drove, I came closer to a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, in my fingertips. My breath came in short, shallow gasps that made me dizzy. Part of my brain kept screaming at me to turn around, to go home, to preserve whatever shreds of plausible deniability I still had. Because once I saw the truth, once I knew for absolute certain what Marcus was hiding, I couldn't unknow it. I couldn't go back. Everything would change forever. But I kept driving. I followed Marcus's gray Honda Civic through the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood, onto Highway 26, toward downtown Portland. The rain had started up again, a light drizzle that made the streetlights blur and shimmer. Marcus took the exit for Mercy General Hospital. My heart lurched. So he really was going there. That part, at least, had been true. He pulled into the hospital's south parking garage, drove up to level 3, and parked in a spot near the elevator bank. I parked on level 1, in a far corner where I had a view of the elevators, but where Marcus wouldn't see my car if he happened to glance around. I watched him get out of his car. He looked completely normal, calm, casual, unremarkable. Just a man making a routine visit he'd made hundreds of times before. He didn't look around nervously, didn't seem anxious or guilty or suspicious. He just grabbed his phone from the passenger seat, locked his car with a beep, and walked toward the elevators. I waited until the elevator doors closed behind him. Then I jumped out of my car and ran toward the elevator bank, my shoes slapping against the wet concrete. I had to catch the next elevator. I couldn't lose him now. The elevator ride felt interminable. I was alone in the small metal box, fluorescent lights humming overhead, while the numbers slowly climbed. When the doors finally opened on the ground floor, I stepped out into the main hospital lobby. It was quiet for a Saturday evening. A few visitors were gathered near the coffee cart, clutching paper cups and speaking in low voices. An elderly man in a wheelchair sat near the windows, staring out at the rain. A security guard stood by the entrance, looking bored, scrolling through his phone. I pulled my baseball cap lower and kept my head down. I scanned the lobby for Marcus and spotted him near the main information desk, but he didn't stop to ask for directions or check in. He just walked straight past, like he knew exactly where he was going. I followed at a distance, weaving through the handful of people in the lobby, trying to look casual and purposeful, rather than like someone stalking their husband through a hospital. Marcus walked past the main elevators, past the gift shop, past the cafeteria with its smell of coffee and industrial food, and then, just as my coworker Tessa had warned me months ago, he walked right past the ICU. The ICU was clearly marked with large blue signs: Intensive Care Unit, Visiting Hours, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., Check-in with staff before entering. There was a secure double door with a call button and an intercom. Behind those doors was where Marcus's mother was supposedly fighting for her life. Marcus didn't even slow down, didn't glance at the doors, didn't acknowledge the ICU's existence at all. He just kept walking. My throat tightened, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Because in that moment, watching Marcus walk past the ICU without a second thought, I knew with absolute certainty that everything he'd told me was a lie. I followed him down a long corridor that seemed to stretch forever, past radiology, past the physical therapy department, where I sometimes consulted on cases, past administrative offices that were dark and empty for the weekend, The corridor got quieter the further we walked, the sounds of the main hospital fading behind us. Finally, Marcus turned into a wing marked long-term care. This was where patients who needed extended hospitalization stayed. People recovering from major surgeries, people with chronic conditions that required constant monitoring, people in comas or vegetative states, people who weren't sick enough for the ICU but weren't well enough to go home. Marcus stopped in front of a door marked 418. He stood there for a long moment, his hand resting on the door handle. He took a deep breath, in through his nose, out through his mouth, like he was centering himself or preparing for something difficult. Then he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click. I stood in that empty hallway, 30 feet away from room 418, frozen in place. My entire body was shaking. My legs felt like they might give out. My heart was beating so fast and so hard, I thought I might be having a heart attack. My mind was spinning with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Who was in that room? What was Marcus hiding? How bad was this going to be? I thought about turning around right then, about walking back through the hospital, getting in my car, driving home, and pretending I'd never followed him. Maybe not knowing would be easier. Maybe the truth would be something I couldn't survive. But I'd come this far, and I needed to know. I walked slowly down that hallway. Each step felt like I was walking through water, like the air had turned thick and heavy and resistant. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly. Somewhere in the distance, a machine beeped rhythmically. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and floor wax, and something else, something antiseptic and chemical and sad. When I reached room 418, I noticed the door hadn't fully closed. It was cracked open just an inch or two, enough to see a sliver of the room inside. I stepped closer, held my breath, looked through the gap. The first thing I saw was the hospital bed, standard issue with metal railings and white sheets positioned near the window. There was a woman lying in the bed, propped up against several pillows. She looked young, maybe early 30s, around my age or a little younger. She had long, dark hair pulled into a loose braid that hung over her shoulder. She was thin, too thin, with the kind of frail delicacy that comes from prolonged illness or injury. She was awake. Her eyes were open, clear and alert. And she was looking at Marcus with an expression that made my blood run cold. It was love. Pure, unmistakable, devastating love. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, holding both of her hands in his. He was leaning close to her, speaking softly. I couldn't hear the words through the door, but I could see his lips moving. He reached up and gently stroked her cheek with his thumb, the same tender gesture he'd done to me 1,000 times over 13 years, the gesture that used to make me feel cherished and safe. The woman smiled at him. It was a slow, slightly lopsided smile, like the muscles on one side of her face didn't work quite right, but it was genuine, full of warmth and affection and trust. And then I saw the photographs. On the rolling table beside her bed, positioned so she could see them easily, were 4 framed photographs. I squinted, trying to make out the details through the crack in the door. A wedding photo. Marcus in a dark gray tuxedo looking impossibly young, maybe 22 or 23. The woman in a white lace wedding dress, radiant and beautiful, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. They stood in front of a wooden arch decorated with flowers and white fabric. Marcus's arms were wrapped around her waist from behind. Her head was tilted back against his shoulder. They both looked blissfully, perfectly happy. Another photo of them on a beach. Golden hour lighting, waves in the background. Marcus was kissing her forehead while she laughed, her eyes squeezed shut with joy. A photo of them at Christmas, both wearing matching ugly sweaters with reindeer on them, standing in front of a decorated tree, mugging for the camera. A photo of them hiking, standing on a mountain overlook, sweaty and smiling, the Columbia River Gorge visible in the background. These weren't recent photos. The quality, the clothing styles, Marcus's younger face. These were old, 10 years old, 15 years old. Photos from a different life, a different marriage. This woman wasn't Marcus's mistress. She wasn't some affair partner he'd been sneaking around with. This woman was Marcus's wife, which meant I don't remember deciding to push the door open. I don't remember my hand reaching for the handle. Don't remember applying pressure. Don't remember the door swinging wide. But suddenly I was standing in room 418, and both of them were staring at me with expressions of absolute shock. "Who is she?" My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. Then louder, stronger, angrier. "Marcus, who the hell is she?" Marcus jumped to his feet so fast he nearly knocked over the bedside table with all those wedding photos. His face went completely white, all the blood draining from his cheeks in an instant. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, his hands still half extended toward the woman in the bed, like he'd been caught mid-gesture. The woman looked terrified. She tried to sit up straighter, wincing like the movement caused her pain. Her eyes, light brown, wide with fear, darted between Marcus and me, trying to understand what was happening. "Caroline," Marcus finally choked out. "Caroline, oh God." "Who is she?" I heard my voice getting louder, more hysterical. I couldn't control it. 13 years of trust, of love, of believing every word he'd ever said to me. All of it was fracturing apart in real time. "Tell me right now who she is." Marcus held up both hands like he was trying to calm a dangerous animal. "Please, just, Caroline, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I was screaming now, not caring that we were in a hospital, not caring that nurses and patients could probably hear me. "Explain why you've been visiting this woman every single night for 8 months. Explain those wedding photos? Are you married to her? Are you married to her?" The woman in the bed made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. Marcus looked back at her, and something passed between them, some unspoken communication. He looked back at me, and I saw tears streaming down his face. "Her name is Amy," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "She's Caroline. She's my wife." The floor dropped out from under me. The room tilted sideways. I grabbed the doorframe to stay upright because my legs had turned to water. "Your wife," I repeated. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I didn't speak. "Your wife." "I can explain." "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been married to her?" 15 years, Marcus whispered. "We got married 15 years ago, right after we graduated from college. We were both 22. The math crashed into my brain like a freight train. 15 years ago. Marcus and I had met 13 years ago, which meant when we met, when he'd asked for my number at that wedding, when he'd proposed to me in Powell's books, when we'd stood in front of a judge and said vows, he'd already been married. "So our wedding," I heard myself say, my voice eerily calm now. "Our marriage. It was fake. It was never real." Marcus's face crumpled. "I can explain everything. Please, just let me." "What happened to her?" I cut him off, looking at the woman in the bed. She was watching us with those frightened brown eyes, clearly wanting to speak but unable to form words. "Why is she here?" Marcus took a shuddering breath. 10 months after we got married, we were in a car accident. I was driving. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit us on the passenger side. Amy hit her head, traumatic brain injury. She was in a coma for 3 months. When she woke up, she couldn't speak, could barely move. The doctor said she'd never recover, that she'd need long-term care for the rest of her life. He gestured helplessly at the room, at Amy, at the machines and monitors surrounding her bed. "She's been here for 14 years, in this room, in this hospital." I stared at him, my mind trying and failing to process this information. 14 years. You've been visiting your brain-injured wife for 14 years, while also being married to me. "I never divorced her," Marcus said quietly. "I couldn't. The accident was my fault, Caroline. I was the one driving. I was the one who decided we should go out that night. And then she got hurt, and I couldn't just abandon her. I couldn't leave her alone here." "Then what am I?" The question came out as a scream, raw and anguished. 13 years of my life, 13 years of love and trust and building a home and planning a future, all of it based on a lie. If she's your wife, Marcus, what the hell am I? He didn't answer. He just stood there crying, his face twisted with guilt and shame and what looked like genuine anguish. And his silence told me everything. I wasn't his wife. I'd never been his wife. Our marriage certificate was fake. Our vows meant nothing. Legally, officially, in every way that mattered, I was nobody. Just some woman who'd been living with a married man for 13 years, thinking she was building a life, when really she was just, what? A placeholder? A second family? The other woman? I'd been the other woman for 13 years, and I hadn't even known it. Get away from me, I said, my voice dead and flat. Don't follow me. Don't call me. Don't try to explain anything else. I want you gone. I turned and ran. I don't remember running back through the hospital. Don't remember the corridors or the lobby or the parking garage. The next thing I was conscious of was sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, shaking so violently my teeth were chattering. I couldn't catch my breath. Every time I tried to inhale, my chest seized up. I was hyperventilating, gasping, drowning on dry land. My marriage was fake. My house wasn't mine. My life wasn't real. 13 years, gone, erased, meaningless. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been an hour. Time had stopped making sense. Eventually, I managed to start the car, managed to drive out of the parking garage. But when I got to the exit, I realized I didn't know where to go. Home wasn't home anymore. It was Marcus's house, a house I apparently had no legal claim to, built on money I had no legal right to, filled with furniture and memories from a marriage that had never existed. So I drove to my sister Emma's apartment in Beaverton. I showed up at her door after 10 p.m., soaking wet from the rain, shaking and crying and barely able to speak. Emma took one look at me and pulled me inside. I told her everything, the whole story, from beginning to end. Marcus's mother, who wasn't really sick, the inconsistencies I'd ignored, the phone call to the hospital, following him to room 418, the wedding photos, Amy, the 15-year marriage I'd never known about. Emma listened with an expression that cycled through shock, horror, fury, and something that looked almost like grief. When I finished, she said 3 words: "We're calling a lawyer." Monday morning, I sat across from Patricia Reeves, one of the top family law attorneys in Portland. Emma had insisted on coming with me for moral support. Patricia listened to my story with an increasingly grim expression, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with something like pity. "Miss Hayes, Caroline, I'm so sorry this happened to you. What Marcus did was unconscionable, but I need to be direct with you about your legal situation." "Okay," I whispered. "You were never legally married to Marcus, which means you have no spousal rights, no claim to marital property. If your name isn't on the house deed, you don't own the house. If the bank accounts are solely in his name, you don't own those funds. The car you've been driving, if it's titled in his name, it's not yours." I felt sick. "So I have nothing." "We'll determine what you do have," Patricia said firmly. "But first, I need you to tell me everything you know about this woman, Amy. Because if she's been in long-term care for 14 years, there are almost certainly disability payments involved. Social Security disability insurance, possibly a settlement from the drunk driver's insurance company, maybe other benefits. And if Marcus has been collecting those funds while also maintaining a completely separate household with you—" She paused, letting the implications sink in. "That's fraud," I said slowly. "That's fraud," Patricia confirmed. "And if we can prove it, if we can show that Marcus has been misappropriating Amy's disability benefits, that's a federal crime." Over the next 6 weeks, Patricia built the case. She subpoenaed financial records, bank statements, Social Security Administration documentation. She found that Amy had been receiving Social Security disability insurance payments for 14 years, approximately $75,000 total. money that was supposed to go toward her medical care, her therapy, her needs. Instead, Marcus had been depositing those payments into a personal checking account, an account Amy didn't have access to, an account Marcus had used to fund our life. The down payment on our house, our furniture, our vacations, everything. Patricia contacted the Social Security Administration's Office of the Inspector General. She contacted the district attorney's office. She laid out the evidence of systematic fraud spanning over a decade. The investigation moved quickly once it started. Federal agencies don't mess around with disability fraud. While the legal machinery ground forward, I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from nothing, because I truly had nothing. Marcus had drained our joint bank account, his bank account, before I could access it. The house was in his name only. The car was registered to him. Our credit cards were in his name, with me as an authorized user. I had no legal right to any of it. I moved into Emma's guest room. I was 36 years old, starting over from zero like I was fresh out of college. Except it was worse than that, because at least in college I'd had hope and possibility. Now I just felt hollow. I took a week off work, claiming a family emergency. Then I went back, because I needed to keep working, needed to keep moving, needed something to focus on besides the smoking ruins of my life. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Susan Chen, who specialized in trauma and betrayal. In our first session, I told her the whole story. She listened without judgment. "You're grieving," she said gently. "Not just the end of your marriage, but the death of your past. You're mourning the version of reality you thought you were living. That's a unique kind of grief, and it's going to take time." She was right. I was grieving. Mourning the Caroline Mitchell who'd lived in a craftsman house in Selwood, who'd believed she was building a life with a man who loved her, who'd felt safe and secure and real. That woman was dead. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. I legally changed my name back to my maiden name, Hayes, erased every trace of Mitchell from my identity. When people asked why, I told them the truth. I'd discovered my marriage was invalid because my husband had already been married to someone else. The looks I got ranged from shock to pity to disbelief. The humiliation was almost worse than the heartbreak. In October, 4 months after that night at Mercy General, the legal hammer finally fell. Marcus was arrested and charged with Social Security fraud, disability benefit theft, and wire fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. He pled guilty to avoid trial, and in November he was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, plus restitution payments of $75,000 to be returned to Amy's care fund. I didn't attend the sentencing. Patricia went on my behalf and called me afterward to give me the details. "There's something else," Patricia said. "Amy's sister Rebecca wants to talk to you. She asked me to pass along her contact information. No pressure. You don't have to reach out if you don't want to, but I thought you should know." I wasn't sure what Amy's sister could possibly want to say to me, but 2 days later, curiosity won out. I called her. Rebecca Hart was 38, 2 years older than her sister Amy. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe in Northwest Portland on a gray November afternoon. She was tall and slender, with the same dark hair as Amy, the same light brown eyes. She looked exhausted and sad and angry all at once. "I'm so sorry," were the first words out of her mouth. "Caroline, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you existed. None of us did. Not me, not my parents, not anyone in Amy's family. We all thought Marcus was this devoted husband who visited Amy every single night out of love and loyalty." I felt tears prick my eyes. "It's not your fault. You have nothing to apologize for." "I just don't understand how he did it," Rebecca said, shaking her head. "How did he have the time, the energy? How did he keep both lives completely separate for over a decade?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Rebecca told me more about Amy, about how she'd been before the accident, vibrant and funny and ambitious, studying to be a veterinarian, planning to travel the world, about how the accident had stolen all of that, about how Amy now had the cognitive function of maybe a 7-year-old on her best days. She could recognize familiar faces. She could understand simple conversations. But she couldn't speak in full sentences, couldn't care for herself, would never be independent. On her good days, she asks for Marcus, Rebecca said quietly. She doesn't understand why he stopped visiting. We've tried to explain that he's in prison, that he did something bad, but I don't think she really comprehends it. She just knows he's gone. We sat in silence for a while, two women who'd both loved Marcus in different ways, who'd both been betrayed by him, who'd both lost years of our lives to his lies. Before we parted, Rebecca said something that stuck with me. You and Amy both deserved better. You both deserve the truth. I hope you can rebuild from this. I'm trying, I said. And I was. It's been 8 months now since that night at Mercy General Hospital. 8 months since I learned that my entire life had been a lie. I'm still rebuilding, still healing, still figuring out who Caroline Hayes is supposed to be now that Caroline Mitchell never existed. I live in a small studio apartment in Northwest Portland. It's tiny, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom the size of a closet. But it's mine. My name is on the lease. No one can take it away from me. I've thrown myself into work. I've taken on extra patients, volunteered for committees, accepted every opportunity to fill my hours with something other than thinking about the past. I've started dating again, though it's hard. Every time someone asks me to coffee or dinner, every time I start to trust someone, I hear Marcus's voice in my head, see his face as he lied to me, night after night, year after year. It's hard to believe anyone now. Hard to let my guard down, hard to imagine ever feeling safe again. But I'm trying. Rebecca and I have become unlikely friends. We meet for coffee once a month. Sometimes we talk about Marcus, about the damage he did to both our families. Sometimes we don't mention him at all. It's strange, bonding with someone over shared trauma, but there's something comforting about it too, someone who understands without needing explanation. Rebecca told me that Amy is doing as well as can be expected. The $75,000 Marcus was ordered to pay back is being used for her care. Better physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. It won't change her prognosis, but it might improve her quality of life. I think about Amy sometimes, wonder what she remembers from before the accident. Wonder if she has any idea that her husband created an entire second life while visiting her every night. Wonder if she'd hate me if she knew, or if she'd understand that I was a victim too. People ask me sometimes how I didn't see it sooner, how I could have believed Marcus for so long, how I could have ignored the red flags and the inconsistencies and my own gut instincts screaming that something was wrong. And the truth is, you believe the people you love. You trust them. You give them the benefit of the doubt because the alternative, that they're lying to your face every single day about everything, is unthinkable. Until it isn't. Until you're standing in a hospital room at Mercy General, staring at wedding photos from a life you never knew existed, realizing that everything you thought was true was actually a carefully constructed lie. So I'm telling you this story for a reason. If your gut is telling you something's wrong, trust it. If the small inconsistencies keep piling up, investigate them. If the explanations sound just a little too convenient, a little too practiced, question them. Don't ignore the red flags. Don't explain them away. Don't convince yourself you're being paranoid or crazy or a bad partner for having doubts. Trust your instincts. They're trying to save you. Because somewhere out there, right now, there's another woman like me. Another person who's ignoring the warning signs, who's explaining away the inconsistencies, who's choosing trust over truth because it feels like the right thing to do, who's letting love blind them to reality. And maybe, just maybe, if she hears this story, she'll ask the questions I should have asked sooner. She'll make the phone call I waited too long to make. She'll trust her gut before it's too late. She'll save herself before she loses 13 years to someone else's lies. My name is Caroline Hayes. I'm 36 years old. I'm a physical therapist in Portland, Oregon. And I survived the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my identity. If this happened to me, it can happen to anyone. Pay attention to the red flags. Trust your instincts, and don't ever let anyone make you doubt what your gut is telling you. Because sometimes, the people we love most are capable of the deepest deceptions. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to stop trusting them and start trusting yourself.